Hey, deserving listeners. Today we're going to talk about how to be a good dad. A few months ago, I was contacted by another podcast called the Dad Challenge Podcast. They're a Canadian podcast, I think on the east side of Canada. And it's a few dads who get together and they tell jokes and they talk about parenting woes and challenges and tips and whatnot. It's a fun podcast. I recommend checking it out if you're interested in such things. And they contacted me, and I thought, well, sounds like an interesting podcast to be a guest on. I really didn't know what to expect. And the conversation turned out to be actually really great. As I was recording it, I was thinking that it really was very indicative of sessions that I've had with fathers. For over 20 years, I've been part of my practice has been working with fathers and how to parent better. And, it's a very nuanced thing. Parenting is extremely complicated. There's a lot of simplistic notions about parenting that are, spouted by so-called experts. And when you're at the ground level and you're actually doing parenting in the balance of all the other things in your life, you realize that it's incredibly complex. It's hard. Every kid is different. And while I was talking with these three dads, I just thought like, wow, maybe I should share this with my listeners as an example of what a session can look like between a family therapist and a father. Because I think they're struggling with extremely common things, maybe universal things. And so I thought I would just share that with you now. So let's just go to that talk. So this is the Dad Challenge Podcast.
Guys, we're here with Dr. Kirk Honda, and he's from Seattle. And I'm really excited because he's going to kind of shed some light from a psychologist, or what would you consider yourself, Dr. Kirk?
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
So from his perspective, he's going to give us just like a professional look at what we should be doing or something we may not have thought of when it comes to parenting, I guess, is the big one. So, Dr. Kirk, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're really excited to have you.
Sure, I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. So let's get right to it. Jeff, do you have anything you want to talk about right away?
I just want to know a little bit about yourself. So you're the therapist and you've got a pretty successful podcast. Where did you get your training and how did you come to this point?
Sure, yeah. I'm a podcast. It's called Psychology in Seattle. I've been doing it for 10 years. I've been trained as a marriage and family therapist and as a psychologist. And my main job is actually teaching as a professor at Antioch University, Seattle, where I train therapists how to be therapists.
Oh, cool. Wow. That's awesome. So you know your onions, basically. That's what you're telling us.
Yeah, as far as my field goes, for sure.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I mean, and as I was searching for someone to come on the podcast, I was listening to other podcasters, and yours came up like number one in there. So I started listening to your show, and it's really, really well done. And I love the way that you present your topics and that you're balanced in everything that you say. So we're really excited to hear what you have to say here.
Thanks. That means a lot to me.
And awesome. We desperately need help.
So for this episode, we want to focus on the psychology of raising teenagers or like preteens. Because Brent here, just so if you don't know, Jeff is to my left. Jeff is a firefighter, and he is a dad. How old are you, Jeff?
I'm 39.
He's pretty old.
I'll be actually 40 in a week, or 2 weeks.
So and Jeff has three kids. He has a 12-year-old,
14-year-old, and a 16-year-old.
Oh. Girl, boy. And then we've got to my right, Brent. Introduce yourself, Brent.
Hi, I'm Brent. I do Brent things.
How old are you?
I'm 40.
And you are in high-tech industry?
Yeah, I'm in the high-tech industry. I work at a company that does consumer wearable technologies, things like that. And I've got two kids. Yeah. My oldest is 12 years old, and my youngest is 10. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of in the preteen stage of things, thinking about what it's like to be a teenager, trying to remember what it was like, and try to apply some of those things. So, yeah. Yeah,
and I'm a little bit different. So I'm 39. I'm actually a music pastor by trade, and I have 4 kids. So I have a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 16-year-old who's almost 17. And so the 2 oldest boys are adopted, and we adopted them about 5.5 years ago. So we've got a big mixed bag here. And so we're just telling you this so you can kind of get a sense of who we are. We're all married, healthy marriages, all that kind of thing. And just kind of now we're going to step into you to help us.
Okay, great.
So is it cool? Maybe is it best? And you can tell me, the best way to do this, but I thought maybe we'll throw some scenarios at you and we could tell you like a mini story and you can tell us maybe, hey, what did you do what did you do? Like almost let us be in a session with you and you kind of just walk us through what you would tell any dad coming in with these issues.
Absolutely.
It's so funny. I was leaving the house to come here, and about 6 months ago, I banned Fortnite in my house because it was making everyone crazy. And just as I was leaving, my kid was playing Fortnite. So
What does that mean? Like making everyone crazy? Like, because my son plays Fortnite. At least he used to. Guys, he does that wacky dance thing. But what does it mean when you say like that they're kind of crazy?
just obsessed and constantly on it. Any spare time, even not spare time, downplaying it, fighting over who gets to play it.
Okay.
Attitude when called to come from playing it. All the
Right.
stuff you can possibly imagine.
So you're on Dr. Kirk Honda's couch right now, and you're telling him the whole story.
Well, shouldn't he be asking me questions?
You're asking great questions.
Okay.
What happened was I was on my way out, so I was in a hurry, and I couldn't believe that he was on there because he knew that he wasn't supposed to be. So in his mind, he tried to use this logic of, well, what I originally did was I took the cord away for the system. I since brought it back during the holidays. They were playing some other games. Never once asked me if they could play Fortnite because they knew about the ban. And but he decided tonight was the night he was going to try it, and he acted completely shocked when I was shocked that he was playing the game that I told him he couldn't play.
Well, let's bring it around. So, Dr. Kirk, so we're saying that our kid, and my kid is the same, very much so. If you let them, one of my kids has no impulse control, and if you let him do whatever he wants, he does not know when to stop. So if Jeff's coming in, he's got this huge issue, there's a big yelling thing, what kind of advice would you give to a parent whose kid is like basically addicted to video games and that? And I think that's a big issue today to today's teens for sure anyway.
Absolutely. The first thing I'll say is that parenting is complicated and there's no easy answers, as real parents understand. There's lots of advice that is thrown around, and some of it is good and some of it is bad, and some of it is really just particular to particular individuals. The other thing I want to say is that parenting is also a decision that there's a lot of decisions within parenting that people will make that are particular to those parents. So one parent might say no video games until you move out of the house, and another parent might say, I don't care, play as many video games as you want, and there's no real right or wrong answer to that. So I just want to point that out. But if you've said, if you're concerned about your kids and you've seen a pattern of problematic use, meaning that they will forego other responsibilities like school or doing chores or socializing or, coming downstairs to go to dinner or something, then, it's a responsible parent reaction to be concerned about that. These games are designed perfectly to quote unquote addict children, and adults. They are, that's their whole purpose, is to make them compelling to play, to repeat use, especially a game like Fortnite, because from my understanding is it's free, but the more you play it, the more kind of likelihood you're going to spend money on extras like the dances and the skins and all that kind of stuff.
Yep, you're correct.
Yeah.
Which also blows my mind.
Right. Because, if it's free, it's like, why would you, spend that extra money? But anyway, so, there's a lot of real smart minds that are doing that. And some people can handle that impulse control. They, play an hour every day and they manage to, get their responsibilities done. But, kids, it's so much harder for them because, one, they don't care about their responsibilities, really. They don't care as much about school. They don't care about doing chores. And the other thing is that their, brains are such that they don't really have the ability yet to control such things. And, we live in a unique time now where kids are being exposed to these kinds of things in a way that they were never done before. And so most parents have to deal with this sort of thing. And the thing that I say is that two things. One is that it's a campaign. It's not a reaction. It's like you can't just, like as you're walking out the door, Jeff, you can't just like scream at him and like have that be the answer to the problem. I mean, sometimes that's the answer, but probably not,
Right.
Mm-hmm. It has to be like a decision that you make to go on a particular campaign that you've planned out with your spouse, by the way. Mm-hmm. And, you plan that out in advance and this is our approach. These are the consequences. This is what we do. This is what we say. This is the reason we say. and you enact that campaign, and you also like try not to freak out when things go wrong. You know, like, I don't know how you felt. How'd you feel when you saw that, Jeff?
I didn't yell. I don't think. Anyways, he might say different, but I probably lectured a little bit more. It was more of a. I really just couldn't believe it because it had been so long. So I just couldn't believe that he was on the game when I saw it. So how did I react initially? I think I was standing there with my jaw dropped.
Yeah, and do you have? So it was unexpected, is what I'm hearing. You thought you had established the rule and you thought he was going to follow it, and this was unexpected to you.
Exactly, and his comeback was, oh well, I thought since you brought the cord back, that just meant basically free for all.
Right, which is, wishful thinking, right? And kids do this all the time, right? Since the day they can reach their hand out and grab something, they're doing things, they're twisting the reality to their favor, and frankly, a lot of times they get away with it, So it's not like it was without precedent that he might get away with this. And
right.
6 months to a child is like 10 years to us. To us, it was like we just talked about this 6 months ago. To him, it was like back then I didn't have any body hair, and now like we're talking
right.
like a wholly different era at this point.
That's
so
actually true.
Yeah, so it's normal, it's just, so the key is you have the rule and you establish the rule and you enact the campaign again, but to not get too worked up about it. As a therapist, we're trained to react and understand our reactions to our clients so we don't do things that are untherapeutic, and parents are the same, right? You have to be aware of the kinds of things that trigger your responses so that you can manage it in the moment. Now, sometimes you want to let that out. You want to, if they're running out into the road, you don't want to like stop and think about, your feelings. You just want to scream at them because they're going to get run over by a car. But
right.
But in a situation like this, it's just like, okay, I don't want to ruin my day at the very least. So what's the campaign? What's the choice? What did we establish? What was the consequence? What's the explanation to him? Is there a punishment? What did me and my spouse establish? What's the protocol? That's and sometimes you have to take a break. Sometimes you just say, and I don't know if the three of you say this, but it's just like, so I'm sort of freaking out right now and I'm really angry at you. And so I need about, I don't know how long, but I need some time to figure out what I'm going to do to you. But for now, I'm taking away the Xbox,
Oh,
Right.
that's smart. I like that idea. So you're saying you reestablished what the campaign was. You remind them and you say, hey, do you remember what we talked about?
Right.
And if they, depending what they're going to say.
Yeah.
But you remind them and say, yeah, this is what we said. And so for me, that's actually something I wouldn't do. I'm like you, Jeff. I'd probably just freak out and leave. I yell and leave. That's what I do. And hearing Dr. Kirk say that you shouldn't do that is kind of eye-opening. And I know you shouldn't, but I tend to do that all the time. That's like my reaction to anything that pisses me off.
Right. So the other thing I want to say about parenting is that if you manage to succeed at your parenting, upper goals, higher minded goals of parenting, like, I don't know, 33% of the time, then you're one of the best parents on the planet. So,
that's some hope.
Yeah, so it's not possible. They're family members. They're not. I have the luxury with my clients that I'm not affected by their lives. These are your children, and it can be very emotional. And so you're going to freak out now and then. It doesn't sound like you damaged them. It just sounds like you have more conversation to have with that person.
You see, but I get accused by my wife of talking too much. So, like, I think as I talk to them and as I lecture them, I guess, that I'm somehow going to say something that's pretty logical because I think pretty logically. So I think if I say something logical, that's just going to go, oh, yeah, that's logical. But it never seems to work. Yet I keep repeating that same pattern over and over again.
Yeah, I have a similar problem. When I feel like I'm not being understood, I assume it's because I haven't explained it correctly.
Yeah.
And so I just keep explaining it, like assuming that at one point this other person's going to be like, oh, that's why I can't play, Fortnite.
Right.
That'll never happen.
It doesn't work, eh?
Yeah, your kid is never ever going to really say or think, in all likelihood, I get why I shouldn't play Fortnite. Thank you for your restraint. That's just maybe when he's 35.
Yeah, until he's in your shoes, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
So is the answer not the answer? So a solution or some kind of solution would be to, because if that's never going to prevail, if explaining something calmly, even like, I know this makes sense, and I know you're just doing this, like, I'm not saying I'm looking for the magical answer, but maybe some alternate solutions to say, hey, look, we talked about this. Why? Or when you ask somebody, why would you do that when you know you're not supposed to do that? And I don't know. They give you that whole shrug the shoulders, and that makes me more angry. But what are some other ways of maybe approaching it from the side to maybe get a response?
Well, it is the foundation for that is the bond. So it's important, and it's hard with some teenagers, but it's important to have a strong bond that you can, have everything be on top of that foundation. So spending good, quality time together as best you can, goodwill. And because without that bond, the child will likely not be motivated to listen. They're not motivated to even plead. Even if they are agreeing with you, they're not motivated to express that. So everything depends on that strong bond. And then from there, you just do your best to explain it. Like, look, pal, here's my situation. And this is just one possible response. I care about you. I love you. I want you to be a successful human being. And I don't mind you playing video games, really, but I've seen you when you start playing, it becomes your entire life, and you throw away everything else in your life, and that really scares me as your dad, because I project into the future, and I just see you at the age of 45 still in my basement playing Fortnite, and that's really concerning to me, and I know you don't want that, and it's my job to think about those things, and so that's why I'm concerned about this, and until you can see that, I kind of feel like it's my job to make that happen, and I hope that one day you actually can have some balance around that. There's nothing wrong with playing an hour or two of video games as long as you're getting all your other stuff done. There's a balance in life. Do you get that? And he might sort of shrug and say, I don't know, but you just keep repeating that, and again, making sure that the bond is strong. And, they love you and they'll listen. They've listened, the reason why they speak English is because of you. They're very attentive to what you do.
So I got a little follow-up to that. So if you do lay out a nice conversation like that, or a nice, what do you even call that, little monologue, which I feel like I've done sometimes, but then when I do get that shoulder shrug afterwards, there's a part of me that feels disrespected, I guess.
Yeah, that's awful. That's awful. That feels, very hurtful. It's very rejecting. It's not the sort of child you want to raise like that. Kids are scared. They look like adults, right? The little adults, but they're scared. They might not know how to respond. They might be confused. They're selfish, One mistake that I see a lot of parents make is that they assume their teenagers are mature, and
yes.
It's just they are in some ways, for sure, and some teenagers are more mature than others. But the vast majority of teenagers, particularly the ones that annoy you more often than not, are just extremely immature, and they have all these impulses, and they have all these friends that are playing Fortnite every night, and they have a really hard time, sifting through all that. And again, by the time they're 18, they've kind of figured out it's not long in your future, but for the time being, you're sort of in the bad zone.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so everybody runs into like this kind of zone eventually. Not everybody, but I mean the majority of teens run into this thing. And I'm finding that as my teen gets older, so here's the difference between, all of our kids here. This is great because I have a teenager who is introverted, doesn't talk. And so this brings me to like another question. It's more like, I've got a teen who hates to hang out with us, doesn't want to go out when we go to the market or do something fun, refuses to come upstairs when we have guests, just shuts himself down and sleeps in his room, Sometimes he'll come, and if there's something that interests him, like if I make a lot of music, I'm a producer, so he likes to make beats, and he'll be like, let's make beats together. Always at the most inappropriate times that I can't help him. But there's only when he wants to do something, and I know it sounds like I'm bitching and moaning here like a little baby, but I'm not, sometimes I'll just be like, okay, shrug my shoulders, he's not going to come down, he's not going to come hang out, and I just let him be what he is. Am I giving him too much freedom to say, or should I be like, hey, you know what? Is there a conversation I can have where I say, we appreciate when you're up here, and it does this, this, and this. How do you navigate that? Like, I know there's so many parents of teenagers whose teenagers could care less about them, who die if they spend 5 minutes with their parents.
Yeah, it's a common problem, and I think it's getting more prevalent as there is more entertainment inside of a child's room. You know, when we were kids, there wasn't much to do in your bedroom, so you had to do other things. So it's all in a matter of the perspective, I think, because once you change the perspective, then it changes the solution. So the way you're framing it is he's making a choice to avoid. You know, it's his choice. He's introverted and he chooses to not come downstairs. He chooses to do this. And that's, a possible truth. But another possible truth, the one that I tend to look at and find more success with, is that he's terrified. There's something about these activities that you're asking him to do that are actually so scary that he'd rather hurt his dad. He doesn't want to hurt you. He loves you. He doesn't want to bother you. He doesn't want your disapproval for sure. But he must be so scared that he acts. Now they'll never say that. They'll never say, "Dad, I'm afraid." Sometimes they will, but most of the time they won't. Most of the time they'll just be like, "I don't know. I don't want to. It's boring. It's dumb." You know. But really, what they're experiencing is intense fear, and they might not even be able to identify that because they're young and immature. And so when you assume that they're afraid, then you can maybe start to problem solve that with them, or approach things in a way that are baby steps to help them gain self-esteem. Like for some kids, I don't know, like give me one example of something that he avoids.
It's funny because you talk about self-esteem, but he's like super cocky too. So he's introverted but cocky. But you're right. So let's say I've got friends coming over, just hanging out, and they've got a teenage daughter, and they brought her over, and he knows this girl, and I said, "Come on up and hang out," and he just says no, literally flat out, "I don't want to," and that's the end of that. And so that was a situation that happened recently. People
who exude cockiness are some of the most insecure people on the planet. They put on that shell. Now, there might be some narcissism in there because, they're children or whatever, but I would be very I'm quite positive that he is quite afraid. And, so in that example, he is projecting ahead. He's like, oh, great, I've got to go down there. I've got to, everyone's going to be watching me interact with this girl. I don't have confidence in my ability to carry a conversation or to say the right thing. I've made mistakes in the past. How easier would it be if I just didn't come downstairs? Plus,
makes a lot of sense.
Plus, what do I get out of facing this fear? Like I gain nothing, and it's just so much safer. And you just keep repeating that over and over again, and the more time that elapses, the child builds this narrative and that they are not good at socializing. They're not good outside of their bedroom. They're not good away from the Xbox. And that can't, but they don't know that, and they don't express that, and they don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then you see them isolate, and it's very concerning to parents, and you should be concerned.
And I think that's really good to if you approach it from a perspective of maybe they're feeling this instead of like, why? Like I always ask why aren't you this? Why don't you want to hang out? And instead, maybe the next question is to be like, hey, is there anything I can help you with to maybe, it sounds like how many people have conversations with their teenager like that? Hey dude, let's chill and let me teach you how to be social. You can't do that either.
No.
Yeah, it's subtle, right? There's a corny way to do it and there's a real way to do it. And like things that I'll say to teenagers are, I'll just drop in certain words. It's just like, okay, I get it. You might be afraid. I don't know. When I was your age, I was afraid. Or just the other day at work, I got afraid in a situation like that. I get it. It's easier to avoid. And he might go like, no, I'm not afraid. But at least it's like you're introducing this notion that there's a possible emotion and that it's okay. The other very easy thing to do is just to talk about your own life, you know. Hey, bud, you know, I just want to talk about last night. We asked you to come downstairs. You didn't come down. Totally cool. But, you know, I'm worried about you because you don't do much outside your bedroom. And I'm thinking about you in the future. And I just would like you to have confidence and to be motivated in that way. And I just want to tell you a story. When I was in the 8th grade, you know, the church youth group asked me to go on this trip, and I did not want to go. You know, I was just worried about it. I thought it'd go terrible. I didn't know these people. I was scared. I didn't know it at the time, but looking back, I was scared. And you know, Aunt Mary forced me to go, and I went, and it ended up being this great time, and it sort of gave me confidence in my ability to like mix it up with other kids. And I don't know, it just felt really good to get out of the house and like make friends and like laugh with other people my age. And so I don't know, I'll just leave that with you. You can roll your eyes or shrug or whatever. I don't care. But, you know, I just want to leave that with you. You know, but you got to keep doing that. You know, it's just like a lot of in and out, you know, it's, you know, short little things.
Just keep doing it. Yeah. I like that. That's really cool. Very cool. Brent, you got something?
Yeah, sure. This might be a bit of an open-ended or like vague question, but like, you know, what's one of the things that parents of teens mostly get wrong? You know, like there would be like just general sort of like pitfalls of like parents who maybe, you know, project some of their, you know, insecurities of things that they did wrong as teenagers or something. But like, are there like common themes of, without really talking about your own, clients that you see, but like that you've witnessed at least, you know, some of the things that parents of teens mostly get wrong. Any insight into that?
Yeah. The common things that I'll see are, and it's not universal, of course, but a very common rant that I will go on with parents that I'm working with are that they focus too much on school. Mm-hmm. School is a great thing. I'm Japanese, you know, Asians are really into school, you know, so I get it. But the emphasis can sometimes sacrifice the bond, which I've been talking about. You know, you're yelling at your kid, trying to get them to not fail a class. Or every day is this negative interaction between you and your kid as you're trying to get them to do their homework or go to school even. And although school is important for sure, vastly more important is the bond between you and them. That bond is what grounds them. It's what gives them meaning in life. It's what gives them fuel. It's what gives them the ability to try on different things. And if they lose that bond, then they really just give up. You know, they really just be like, well, my parents hate me, so why do anything? You know?
You're hitting the nail right on the head. Like I'm so guilty of this, and I have 4 kids. So, and you know, I've got a 4-year-old and I've got a 6-year-old who are biologically my kids, and then the brothers who are older. And my middle child, Tristan, I'll just say my middle child. My middle child, he struggles with that the most because he has the most behavioral issues, should I say. So I feel guilty, and so does my wife a lot of the time because he says that all the time. You guys just hate me. You just hate me. But I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. A lot of the times, because of our stringent rules and the way that we run things, is because we want him to succeed. Because we know that if we give him a mile or an inch, he'll take a mile, right? We know that. So, is there a medium ground? Is there some time where I should be backing off, or should I stick to my guns? So, because I know what the outcome will be if I don't.
You can absolutely stick to your guns. You can even be more strict. But the point is that the bond has to be there as a balance. So,
right. I mean, you're talking about the bond a lot. Like, are there some examples that you can give in terms of like how do you like create this bond? Like, I love this. I wrote this down. You know, the foundation is the bond. So, like, what are some thoughts about like creating the bond? And you know, we'll get back into
some tips and tricks on how to create or recreate or build back up a bond.
Well, teenagers are really self-centered, so complimenting them a lot helps, like,
That's true.
You're really good at Fortnite, or
Never. We're editing that out, just so you know, Dr. Kirk.
yeah, you're smart, you're nice, you're funny. That was funny. That was nice. Let's cook dinner together and make it fun. Let's make beats, like the beats thing with your son.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge bonding thing. He'll never forget that.
It's true.
He'll remember it much better than you will, honestly. And, trying to expand that a little bit. I mean, how many parents can jam music with their kids? That's a big deal.
It's true. He thinks he's better than me, and he's not. I just want to point that out. And it's funny because his little brother the other day, I made a song because I'm a songwriter and I love it. And I made this song, and it's like this poppy song that I got my wife to sing on. And I showed his younger brother, and in the car he's like, "Why don't you just get Tyson to make the music?" I'm like, "Cause." He's like, and he's just like, he was like hating on me for like not, but
Right.
I took a step back and I said, Tristan, it's not very nice to say, like, if you said you showed somebody something you created and said, oh, I know someone who can do that better, why don't you get them to do it? But I took the opportunity to say, hey, look, it's really cool that you love your brother and his ability, because he wants to be his brother, right? Like every other young boy in the world. But it was an opportunity to say, oh man, you just actually hurt my feelings. And I've never said that to him before.
But maybe it was an opportunity for you to also be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Maybe next music project.
Oh no, I said I hope your brother is better than me one day, but he's not.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, talking about your feelings can also be a bonding thing for your kids. The assumption is that they love you and they really want your approval. When I was a kid, my mom, when I was a teenager, my mom would hug me and kiss my cheek and stuff, and I would roll my eyes, but boy, did I love it. And if my mom just looked at my behavior, she'd be like, well, Kirk really just does not like to be kissed and hugged as a teenager. But she knew better because she knew that I was an insecure child and was having trouble with vulnerability. And, your kids are the same way. They so desperately want your approval and so desperately want your attention. And sometimes, as they enter teenage years, they start to vacillate with that. And if things get out of whack, then you can sort of fall into a pattern where there really isn't a forum for that kind of attention and love to be between you and your teenagers,
Yeah. So, like, talking about this education side of things, I think we've been leaning a little bit towards the strict side, right? We want our kids to get the best grades, to be motivated to go to school or whatever. But, like, as a lot of parents, I draw a lot of my parenting inspiration from my own experiences as a kid. And think about my parents. They were not so strict towards me in terms of like getting high grades or like whatever. And I found that as I was growing up, school, like in elementary school or even middle school, grades didn't matter quite so much as they did when like I was older, right? So I think the approach that we kind of take right now is we're not quite so focused on grades at the moment. Would you see like the opposite as being like true as maybe like something that can be like a negative effect to kids, in terms of parenting? Like what if are we too soft? How do we know that we're too soft if that's the case?
Sorry, before you answer that, Dr. Kirk,
Sure.
This is a huge question because of the quote-unquote snowflake era, where we've created, people say that, I'm not sure you agree with this, or I agree with this, but people have said we have created a block of kids who can't lose, who don't know how to lose, who don't know how to who have never been said no to.
Can't be wrong.
How do you know? Can't be wrong. But what Brent's asking is, how do you know you're too soft?
It's a little bit different, though. I mean, I'm not necessarily I'm not raising my kids to be snowflakes, but I mean, it's more like, you know what, really, like getting an A in elementary school, it's okay, because really, what are you learning? You know, like what can we remember from what we've learned from elementary school? Like,
so you're just saying specifically as it pertains to school?
Yeah, it pertains to school.
How do you know you're being too soft?
Just in general, how you know you're being too
Yeah,
soft.
well, both are good. Accomplishments are great. Achievement in school is great, and character is great. I think character is more important, but there's nothing wrong with emphasizing both. And, kids are different. Some kids you don't really need to do, among all your kids, I'm guessing one of them is one of those kids where you just don't really have to do anything to them. They just always manage to do the right thing. Do any of you have a lucky kid like that?
My
Jeff's daughter?
no, she's. I gotta be careful. She's the one who wouldn't want me talking about her the most. No, I've got one for like school wise who I don't have to say anything to.
Right. So
and they'll just go and do it all.
Yeah. So there are some kids where they just know, or they have self-esteem or motivation, whatever. It's just kind of some kids are just born that way in some ways. And so there's that. And then other kids, it's like everything's a struggle. And so for example, if with some kids, the situation is so hard with them for all areas, character, school, behavior, drug abuse, that sometimes you have to like let go of certain things because you got to pick the most important one, So it's a case by case basis.
So it's not wrong to think, I'd rather my kid play Fortnite than be out, getting drunk, getting girls pregnant.
That's absolutely a better scenario.
But I'm saying I sometimes justify that in my house by saying, hey, I'd rather than be here playing video games, being all nerdy, than out, trying drugs and, hanging out behind the mall and, being that type. I'm not saying that those kids are terrible, but I would prefer my kid to not start hanging out. Like, I think it was different, though, when we were young. Teenagers didn't have the smartphones and everything else to be connected at all times. They did hang out at the park and at the 7-Eleven. They did all that stuff, and they at the skate park. And they don't do that these days as much as far as I see. I don't see that. I don't see tons of kids loitering anymore.
They do, but just at lesser rates. And absolutely, I mean, data shows that kids today are less likely to use drugs, less likely to drink, less likely to get pregnant earlier, and less likely even to have sex earlier. And so, maybe Fortnite is part of that reason. Thanks,
Fortnite. That should be their ad campaign. Your kid won't get pregnant young when she plays Fortnite. I don't know. I think that one of the things is going back to the snowflake thing, the era of snowflakes, is do you see a difference right now, or do you see this movement or something that's happening with parents coming in, raising kids like that, or are you seeing this? Are you seeing what the world thinks it's seeing as it pertains to people being too easy on their kids?
I see a lot of things. I've been a family therapist for over 20 years, and it's hard for me to gauge trends on the clients that I've seen. But as far as I can tell, there hasn't been any serious differences, even among kids. Like, if you just sort of watch the media, it's like, oh, there's a certain caricature that they will paint of teenagers today.
Yep.
But when I actually talk with teenagers in my office, I find them to have the identical thoughts and lives that I had when I was a teenager, even though they have all these extra technology things.
That's cool. Let's go to
But they're concerned about friends. They're concerned about fashion. They're concerned about self-esteem. They're concerned about, they think fart jokes are funny,
as always.
Yeah, they're very similar, I find, to me.
From what I've been listening to, and it's something, I'm actually going to make a confession right now, because I think you said something that my wife's always telling me. She always tells me I got to let some things go, and I've heard you kind of allude to that, like the shrugging of the shoulders. When you told the story about you and your mom, she was smart enough to let it go, I guess. I'm terrible at that, so I'm confessing that when my wife hears this, she's definitely going to say I need to listen to you and her.
How were you when your kids were younger?
I would say I was probably better then. I was probably hardest on our first one. Like, anytime you would do anything like remotely wrong, I was all over him probably. And it might be the reason why he pushes back against me now. But I would say better. But now now for some reason it seems to be this pride thing or disrespect thing. But that aside, the question is a parent ever justified in giving up on something, though? Like, I know we're supposed to let some things go, but should we actually give up?
Not the situation you're talking about, in my opinion. I mean, of course, every parent has the right to make their own choices, but, I've seen situations where I have thought giving up was the right thing to do. You have a kid who is in a gang who never comes home, has stopped going to school years ago, violent, has guns stashed under the bed, these kinds of situations. I have seen parents, after years of trying, in my opinion, ethically give up, so to speak, But no, I don't think the situation you're talking about. I would just, if I may, Jeff, I would look at how you feel during those times first. It's kids can devastate us. Our own kids can devastate us. They can, same as our spouses can, same as our parents can. They can, with a shrug, with an eye roll, destroy our ego. And when we are destroyed, we don't feel good, and we will do something to try to stop that from happening. And a very common response, particularly for men, is to lash out, And so now that doesn't mean you have to not have feelings. It means that you take care of yourself, you go into a situation with him and you're just like, okay, he's probably going to hurt my feelings. He's probably going to shrug and it's going to devastate me. And I need to recognize that. And as soon as he does that, I'm going to say, I have a plan. I'm going to walk out of the room, or I'm going to say, son, when you do that, it hurts my feelings. It makes me feel like you don't care about me. You don't have to respond now, but I just want to tell you, when you do that, it really hurts me. Or you walk out of the room and you tell your wife, you're just like, he did that again, and it devastates me when he shrugs his shoulders. Can you tell me I'm a good dad? Can you tell me I'm doing the right thing? Those are very important things. And as men, we're taught we're not supposed to do that, right? We're supposed to be able to do everything on our own. We don't need to ask for support. We don't even have hurt feelings. And, I think that's unfair to us.
Do we protect our kids from the mistakes we made when we were young, or do we let them make their mistakes? I know that parents are split on this, and sometimes I'll say that to my son, that, look, man, you can't try drugs because your parents are addicts. And so if you do this, you will most likely become an addict. I'm not saying he will, but maybe I'm scaring him. But and I'm not saying I was, but I'm trying to protect sometimes, because I grew up very similar to my nephews, who are the adopted boys. Broken home, drugs, abuse, all that stuff, and I went the other way, and I got lucky because no one else in my family did. But I'm trying to say, look, don't do what my brothers and sisters did and my mom did. Don't do that. Do I let them make mistakes, or do I try to protect them?
Yeah, well, the question is a bit. Let me reword the question, because it's letting kids do things, particularly as they get older, is kind of a moot point because they just do it anyway. Right. So it's a matter of guiding them, right? And this is another mistake that I see a lot of parents make is, when your kid's 5, you don't guide them, you control them. You say, you are now going to bed. You are now eating. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you're not hungry. I don't care if you're not cold. You're wearing a jacket. There's no debate, Mm-hmm. You can't depend on a 5-year-old child to make choices that are good for them, right? When you're crossing the road, they don't want to hold your hand. It's like, you're going to hold my hand. Well, that does not work when they're 16, because they feel like they deserve, their own autonomy in some ways. And so at that point, you shift to a matter of guidance, a matter of explaining and helping them to understand. With drug use, for example, the best case scenario is you have a automatic pilot that is inside that child's mind that guides them. And sure, they might experiment, it's normal to do that, but they're not going to let it become a problem, and they understand what addiction is. But when you exert control, like, you are not going to do this, and that's all you do, then the kid doesn't, they just sort of file that away as like, yeah, parents want to get in the way of all fun, and they have a lot of stupid things that they say. So it's a matter of trying to download your wisdom into them. And, that's a campaign. That's a lot of conversations.
It's the long con.
Yeah. You know what? Honestly, take them downtown Kitchener and walk them around for a little bit and see. Stay away from drugs, kids. Is there something
to be said about that type of parenting, where you're like, hey, you see that homeless guy over there, that crackhead, don't do that. I mean, I know that sounds super judgy, and it is dickweedish, but I'm just saying, is there something to be said for, not necessarily just, hey, look at that homeless guy, but just to say, hey, look, do you really want to become like that? Is there a danger in that?
No, there's if it's true that someone has succumbed to addiction for one reason or another and their life has been ruined and you want to use them as an example, or they even want to come up to you and use themselves as an example. I don't know. That can work. But again, it's all about how it's received. If they just hear blah, 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 then it's pointless, right? It's all a matter of like, how do you speak to them in a way that they get? Then that's the trick. And as a family therapist who's talked with a lot of teenagers, I can tell you it's an art form, the ability to break through that shell, particularly with some teenagers who just flat out refuse to listen to adults, It's a very tough nut to crack, but that's the trick. It's not a matter of like, what do I say? It's like, what do I say that they receive, that they hear? That can be a very subtle thing.
I think it's important too that as a parent is possibly to always be getting counseling. I mean, counseling isn't just for those, and therapy isn't just for those people who don't have it all together. It's for people who have it together, who need it. It's just good. This is why I love this podcast, because this is therapeutic for me. We can tell our stories. We can talk to professionals. We can talk to each other. But that's another thing, is that something's going to work, but it's never a bad idea to talk to someone like Dr. Kirk in his office and say, look, I need some advice. I need some pointers. I need you to write down a sentence for me. I need this
some
and that.
Guidance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talk with parents all the time. A common scenario is parents will call me up and they'll say, my teenager Johnny is off the hook. He's skipping school. He's hanging out with bad friends. He's flunking all his classes. So I'm going to drop him off, and I need you to fix him. And then I say, okay, well, for the first meeting, let's have you all in the room and let's talk about it. And then over time, often what ends up happening is I'm only meeting with the parents. Because Johnny doesn't want to go to therapy and doesn't want to talk to me, and is only with me at best 1 hour a week, whereas they're with the parents, 24/7. And so, so there's a lot of venting that can happen in therapy where parents just sort of vent their feelings about their kids. Parents come together, they bond together as parents in terms of like, we're in this foxhole together. You strategize, you make plans, and family therapists who are experienced in such matters can have a lot of guidance. Now, like I said, there's no silver bullet, there's no right answer to these things, so it's a lot of trial and error. It's like, well, let's develop this campaign and see how this works for a couple months, and let's see what this does, and then you just keep responding to what's happening.
Very much like e-commerce, which is our past episode, split testing your ads to make sure which one works, and throw all your money behind that ad. That's basically what you got to do.
That's right. You take two kids and you do one parenting style with one kid, you do another parenting style with another kid, and whichever kid you screwed up more, you realize
Sweet.
That's what it comes down to. It's always our fault in the end anyways.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got a question. You talk about campaigns. I'm wondering about a campaign on this one. So let's say this isn't actually a scenario I deal with, but some of our listeners maybe. Your young teen is sending or receiving nudes on their telephone. What do you think about monitoring their phones? Is that a good or a bad idea? I know my wife and I have had that debate about monitoring the phones. We actually held off getting phones for the long time just because of everything we heard about brain development and all that. But once you give them and you know what other people are up to, we felt like, we should be monitoring these.
Absolutely. I think that the marketers at AT&T and Samsung and T-Mobile have completely tricked all of us into thinking that children need to have cell phones. And, we grew up in a time when that was absurd. And I'm not against parents having their kids have cell phones, but what I'm also saying is that they don't necessarily need them. And just because they're whining about it doesn't mean that they deserve it. And just because every single one of their kids has one doesn't mean that they deserve it. And doesn't mean that it's not harmful to them. So that's one thing. The other thing is if you do give them a cell phone, just telling them flat out, I have installed software where I get to see everything you do. You can talk to your friends just like you can talk to your friends in the next room. I can hear everything you're saying, but that's just how it's going to work. You can browse the internet, you can look at Reddit or whatever, but just let you know, like I have, I'm going to be able to see, or you just randomly grab their phone and start looking through stuff. I don't have any problem with that. Again, it's a case by case basis. Some kids, there might be so many other problems that one you just have to let go. I have a similar thing with like cleaning your room. Like some kids, it's like, that's the only issue you're working on with them, then go for it. But if you're working on 100 issues, cleaning the room is not an important issue to be working on.
That's cool.
Good.
That's some cool advice. That's some insight to say, like, write down all your issues and then maybe prioritize them and say, look, I can let that one go, or let's work on this one, and then next.
Yeah, pick your battles.
But there's so many people that I've talked to about this whole phone monitoring thing, especially, teens themselves are going to say, no, F that.
Yeah.
But I've even heard parents like, no, they are themselves, let them make the mistakes they're going to make, but not, because we're in Canada, it's different. I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, but if you send a nude or receive a nude, both of you are in.
Yeah, if you have that, like, and it's like underage, like you're going, and that's the thing with my kid too. Like we were talking about this, like straight up, it's like you cannot do this. Say if it did, we had this conversation with him. It's like if anyone sends you like an inappropriate picture, like you get caught with that, you're going to have a criminal record. Like you're in a lot of trouble right away. It doesn't matter if you guys are the same age. You have that, especially if you send that too. Man, you're passing that around. Yeah, so like that was my assumption. I'm glad to hear that there's some truth to that, because like, I'm okay to lie a little bit to my kids if I instill some like, good fear in.
Yeah, that's a question. Is it okay to lie to your kids when it's I guess for their benefit?
If you can get away with it, if you can't, then you've damaged something there.
For sure.
That's true.
I would agree with that for sure.
Yeah, and usually it's not required. Like if a parenting action requires a lie, then you're probably not in the right zone to begin with. You know,
you did something wrong if you got to that point for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, in the States, I'm not up to date on the laws because it's not my specialty. But yeah, from what I understand, if two minors send a naked photo of themselves, but or exchange, they both can be prosecuted as a sex offender and be put on the sex offender public list for the rest of their life. I'm not sure on the details on that. And so you just tell your kids that, because again, because if they have those phones at any moment, they could do it. So having a rule that they could break is not the solution. The solution is to have an autopilot of wisdom inside of them that understands. And maybe you have to tell them 20 times for them to know. Maybe you have to send them an article and say, I'm not lying about this. Or look at this kid, this happened to him. Kids are afraid of stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure you've heard your kids repeat things that you've said. They're like, oh, don't get close to that thing because, you'll get hurt, even though they've never done that themselves. They've internalized what you've told them. They listen.
Yeah.
I got to throw in a tiny little story here just because it kind of goes with what we were talking about the phones. We avoided the phone thing for a long time. We got our kids flip phones just actually last year, which is kind of crazy for a 16 and a 14-year-old. Like everybody's got phones and they didn't. And they always told us that. But somehow those two little weasels, and this is where other parents kind of drive me a little bit crazy. They're buying their kids upgraded phones. So my kids came home, both of them, like within like a week of each other, with somebody else's phone that they just gave them because they didn't need it anymore. They got a better phone than I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you have decided that is a risk, and again, you explain it to the kids, they're not necessarily going to get it, but there are risks, giving a child a smartphone today without any kind of way of controlling what they're seeing. You're giving them access to literally every worst human behavior in image and story and, and movie form that has ever existed. Every Nazi thing that's ever happened, every child porn thing that's ever happened, everything that's ever happened is on there. And every abuser is looking for every abuser of children that is into that sort of thing is looking for kids. And so it is a portal to, some of the worst. I mean, I've been traumatized by some of the stuff I've seen on the internet as an adult. And so, for parents just to hand that over, I find to be strange.
Yeah. That's refreshing to hear from someone who is a therapist who understands this, the psychology of it all, it's really refreshing to hear that, because that's not the norm for parents. I see kids who are 9 years old with smartphones. I'm like, I want to punch their parents in the face. I'm like, are you serious? Like, I'm like, I don't want to judge either, because maybe you have a great boundary, maybe you have some software in there, whatever it is. But man, at some level, we got to figure this out, where we have to say, like, this is psychologically, this is bad for a child to own a smartphone. Yeah. I mean, basically, we're doing this podcast, Dr. Kirk, because we want parents to kind of have a little bit of insight, or a little bit maybe a different view of what we could be doing better. And I think what I'm hearing, and overall, no matter what problem you are struggling with as a parent, it's bond first. Once the bond is established, all the other stuff may not be as hard. It might not be as easy either, but it'll be easier to navigate when your bond is strong.
Absolutely. When the bond is strong, they're much more motivated to obey you, because they, love your approval and they trust that they're going to get it. Once that becomes a little shaky, then things can go bad. And
it's not necessarily to like make a bond in order for them to listen and obey you, right? Like there's something authentic that has to happen. I think kids can pick up on that if you're just kind of like putting in the time so that they can, you feel like they might listen or something like that. I think when you have that kind of like genuine thing happening, it could potentially make it easier. Maybe I'm hoping, my kid's still just 12. So I don't know, man. I'm like staring down the barrel of like the teenage years, and I'm just hoping that I've got my ducks in a row.
Yeah. And that's a good thought. It's like, okay, before the S hits the fan, how can I make sure that I have a good foundation going into the bad years? 13, 14 are the worst years in my experience.
Yeah.
So,
boy, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
13, 14 are the worst years? It gets better after that, you think?
I mean, 15 isn't great, but 16, 17, yeah, you start seeing maturity, and by 18, 19, there's pretty big differences.
All right. Yeah.
Well, here's a quick question, or here's a quick thought. Now, my older boys are adopted, and so we go through a lot of issues together. There's been things in the past where I got really upset about things and choices that they've made that I really just don't want them to make, right? But overall, not crazy amounts of craziness, but because of his past, and because kids who generally grow up in broken homes and in this type of situation, it tends to cycle, which is why the government gives you more advantages than kids who don't have that. So that's what I'm trying to defy the cycle at this point.
Yeah, I don't know the history of your adopted kids, which you're a saint, by the way, for doing. Thank you on behalf of society for doing that. They likely were traumatized or mistreated in some way, and are going to have effects during teenage years that will be challenging. And it's a neurological thing. Early development and attachment are neurological developmental phases, and it can be very challenging. And I specialized in the beginning of my career with a lot of parents like you who had adopted kids, and when they became teenagers, they started doing a lot of concerning behaviors, and it's a very tough situation. Yeah.
So as far as it goes, I've seen other adopted kids who went way, way, way worse than my kid, and I'm happy that they're doing well, but. It's funny because Jeff and I's son, Ty and Tyson, they're besties, like bestie friends, and they're so different with their childhoods, the way that they were raised, completely different. And so it's funny to watch how sometimes Jeff will have problems, and I'm like, man, I'm glad I don't have that problem. But then I'll have a worse one, and it's like, I think it's okay as a parent to be like, oh, thank God, I'm not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I'm guessing, what your listeners get out of this podcast is how, I'm not alone. That's a very important, I mean, one of the things, one of the first things I tell parents when I talk to them is that our society today, I'm guessing Canada's similar, is it's extremely judgy about parents.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you have a kid who got a C in a class, or if you have a kid who shoplifted, or if you have a kid who plays Fortnite every day, there's this, huge chorus of society that is ready to, jump down your neck and say, that you're screwing things up, or you're not hard enough on your kids, or you're not soft enough on your kids, and I find that to just be incredibly oppressive to parents. And so what parents do is they just go into a shame spiral and cry themselves to sleep every night and think that they're terrible. And what does that do to their parenting? Well, it's not good. And they either get more angry or more distant or something. And, and what your podcast is doing, I'm guessing a lot of parents are listening, or at least the three of you are listening to each other, is that it can be incredibly uplifting and normalizing, which gives you the strength to, be a parent once again.
That's a big aha moment for me right now, is what you're saying, is that some of the things that we're projecting on our kids is because we don't want to be judged by other parents. That's crazy to think that that's sometimes what parents do, how they will raise their kids because of that. Wow.
Yeah. We're all a part of one big system,
Yeah. Takes a village.
Can I actually ask one more question? That's actually something that I kind of want to know. One of my kids, who I feel bonds pretty good, has an issue whenever confronted with like doing something that did upset, like even if you mildly approach it, the response is almost to like take off right away and run away from it. I mean, like just around the house too. So like if something happens, like an overreaction, if you question right away, if that overreaction were to happen, you go, hang on a second, like why are you reacting that way? The immediate reaction is to then like run away from it, go to the room.
Right. So if I'm understanding right, the child will have a over emotional reaction like anger or upsetness or something, and then you point out like, geez, I think you're overreacting, and then they run away.
Right. Yeah. So maybe ask to do something. So, hey, would you mind doing this? A snotty response back to it, and then, whoa, how come you responded that way? And then take off.
Interesting. Do you ever follow him into the bedroom?
With a belt?
Yeah, I think I've pursued before, and to again do my logical thing where I would say, hey, why are you doing this? And I tend to actually with this child be a little bit easier, and the other ones would accuse me of being a little bit easier. But for some reason, I have an easier time talking, even when that child is upset. I don't know why. But I still don't seem like I get anywhere.
Yeah, asking a child why is probably not a fruitful endeavor.
Doesn't work, eh? Okay.
Yeah, because they don't know why.
Okay.
They literally don't know why. So you have to help them with that. You have to show them the landscape. So you're asking them to do a chore, and then they're like, God, I don't want to, and then they storm off, and you're just like, geez, what's going on here? You go into the bedroom, and you're just like, so I'm guessing you don't want to do the chore. No, I don't want to do the chore. Okay. Well, you seem very emotional. Can you tell me what's happening for you right now? I don't know, nothing, and you're like, well, you seem angry. You seem very angry at me. I don't know. And they're like, no, I'm not angry. I'm frustrated or something, And then you're like, okay, you're frustrated. I get it. I'm with you. You still have to do the chore, but I get frustrated.
I don't even get that much out of them, because they will say they're not angry. They will say they're not this. I didn't do that. I didn't do it, but I get nothing at the end. That's the part where do kind of want to get to the bottom of it and say, hey, what is the emotion you're feeling? Because I can see that there is something, but I can never seem to get to what it is.
Can I interject here? Dr. Kirk, do you think that maybe his kids are saying they're using that as an out because they know that he's probably just going to be like, oh, man. Do you think that that Jeff's not going to pursue them or do anything about it, and that's maybe they're using it as an excuse, or they're manipulating?
Well, do they do that every time, Jeff?
It seems to be like every time. Asking them to do something is only one example. Like it could be over anything. Like if something happened, if they were to like drop something, they may like run away before something's even said.
I suspect it's an emotional regulation thing. So they have an experience, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's freaking out on some level, and his room is a safe space or something, which is
Okay.
fine. And what he needs help with is how to know what's happening for him and maybe not be ashamed of his emotions on some level.
Right.
But the goal of getting to the bottom of something, I'm telling you as a therapist who is trained on getting to the bottom of something,
Right.
it might take years to get to the quote unquote bottom of something.
So just continue the talk.
Yeah, just lower the expectations on like what kind of revelations they're going to have. It's not likely they're going to be like, "Oh my God, Dad, you really helped me understand myself. Thank you." They're going to be like they're going to resort to what is safe for them because remember they're terrified and
Right.
and stupid on some level.
Yep.
They don't know things yet. And so some kids. The one thing I like to tell parents is some kids have never been asked how they really are feeling. Just think about that.
Right.
Wow.
Some kids have never actually been asked, how are you really feeling right now? Tell me and I'm not going to punish you for, you can just tell me whatever emotion you're having and I'm going to let that be okay. Some kids have never been asked that. And guess what? When you ask them how they're feeling, they don't know how to answer that question. One, they might not know. Two, if they do know, they're like, well, what kind of landmine am I going to step on with this one? Am I going to be wrong for being angry? And so baby steps, so the first time you talk to them, you're just like, you might ask a little bit, you don't get an answer back. And you just say back, you're just like, well, you seem angry to me, which is okay. You can be angry. You still have to do the chore, and I'm going to give you half an hour. You seem a little upset. I'll give you half an hour, and if you want to talk about it, go for it. He's not going to come and talk about it with you. He's going to huff and puff or whatever. But you've laid a groundwork. It's a little baby step. You've introduced this language about anger and emotion, and you're a dad that's willing to talk about that. You do that 100 times, and maybe the 101st time he'll say like, "Yeah, I think I'm angry," and then you do that 100 more times, and then maybe the next time. As soon as he feels the anger, he'll be like, I think I'm angry right now. Okay, thank you for saying that to me instead of running out of the room.
It's true. It's the long game. I mean, this is really cool. I mean, as far as I know we got to wrap it up because it's been so long, but maybe it's another episode to talk about how we parent with our wives because I'm different than my wife. 100% opposite the way I parent with
That's
my
not
wife.
a good campaign, man.
It's not a good. I gotta.
It
build a
It
campaign.
can work. It can work. You just have to have an agreement about it.
Good
Yeah.
cop, bad cop.
Yeah. All right. So, Dr. Kirk, thank you so much for coming on the Dad Challenge podcast. We really appreciate your time. And hopefully in the future, if we have another psychology question or series, we'd love to have you back on and talk about that if you're willing to do that.
Yeah, sure. It's been fun. And like I said, you guys are doing good work. I'm sure people are really benefiting from you guys.
Yeah. That's
You
awesome.
too, and thanks for the advice.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay. That was really cool. I think it's a therapy session. Basics is what he gave us.
Well, and how many times did I say during this podcast about my or disrespect? I care about that so much. I think I had like this massive realization that it really comes down to a pride issue for me.
Yeah.
The reason I overreact is because I don't want to lose,
Yes.
and they're feeling the same thing. So
Yes.
I got to let that go. Because
And they're like you because they're competitive because
I
they
get
want to
it.
be you.
And I get it. And Trisha's always telling me that too. That it's me and not blaming me, but saying like, hey, that's you. Like when they do that, that's you. So I really gotta.
Well, look at the silver lining though, because they want to be like you. So you have major influence over your children.
Yeah, it's good, but I should be influencing them to
You're
not
right.
continue down
But
this path that
you're right.
of overreaction and need for
To always be
pride
winning,
and
yeah.
to win. I need to get rid of that. So
Here's the coolest thing I learned from Dr. Kirk is don't have rules to break, have wisdom to inject. So meaning don't just have hard and fast things. If we don't do this here, we don't do this, do it. There are certain things, yes, you don't want your kids doing.
Yeah.
Like you're not, there is no, lighting fires in the house. There is no, for us, there are some hard and fast rules that we will never let go. But I think he's right. He's like, just inject the wisdom instead of making the rule. Because I think what a lot of parents fail at, especially conservative Christian parents, is that they have all these rules. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, instead of saying, hey, here's why we shouldn't. Or here's what you should think about before you do something like that.
Yeah.
That was huge. That was a big aha moment
big
for
one
me.
for
That's
sure.
cool. Yeah, I think for me it was when he said, what is it? The foundation is the bond. Like we're just talking about like when you are, trying to discipline your kid or you're trying to instruct them to like, not do this or do more of these things. If you don't have the sort of like relational foundation, it's difficult for them to really kind of like connect with you and really understand like who you are. Like they know that you're their dad or whatever, but it's a completely different thing when you have that sort of like foundation. And like the ways that he suggested to do that were so simple.
Yeah.
Like not even just like, hey, make sure every month that you go out, you take them out, and you go, hit some baseballs or whatever. But it was like, compliment them, say nice things about
complimenting.
them.
That was huge.
And like that's like something that can be like really disarming. I would imagine as a kid. So like it's. Yeah.
I really like that. And I think one of the things I wish I could do better was the bonding thing. And there's one thing I should do better, because I have 4 kids. And the thing I'm sometimes the most ashamed of is that my 2 younger kids get a lot of touch and love and kisses and like things like that. And my boys don't want it, or they say they don't. And so we rarely do. And because and they're adopted and it's different. There are my biological nephews. They're my blood, and I've known them since they were born, but it's just different. It is different. And so the bonding needs to happen differently. So for Tyson, that means I have to sit down and make beats with him. Yeah. I got to sit down with him and be like, man, that's a good beat.
And
like, that's sick. And give him a hug. Punch him in the nuts and stuff.
Yeah, kiss him in the head too.
You know what?
Kiss him on the cheek.
You're right. And I think he's going to be like, oh, you're such a loser.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think you just do it, and you constantly do it. So for one thing, if we're challenging each other, one of the things I want to get better at is building my bond and finding something we can do together and making that a thing that we do. Like, they know it, I know it, that Wednesdays is this day and we're doing this.
All right, so that was my talk with the Dad Challenge podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did talking with them. They're very charming guys, very real guys, very vulnerable in a lot of ways, and I think that they are doing good work for society in some ways. Their listeners are probably really benefiting from this podcast. There's a lot of different new podcasts that have been created in the last 5 years, and I think there are a small set of podcasts that I think are actually doing a lot of good social justice work, and I think this podcast might be along those lines. Because, a lot of dads are alone, they, as we talked about in the interview, and ashamed, and they've been socialized to not ask for help and to try to be independent. And there's just a lot of horrible things, for dads. And we all need to do what we can to help each other out. So again, that was the Dad Challenge podcast. So at the end of this episode, I thought I would just ramble off some business things. If you haven't become a patron, do so now by going to patreon.com. I get a little email every time someone becomes a patron of the podcast, and it just lights up my day. So if you feel so inclined, that'd be great. Also, if you're having trouble with the premium feed, email us at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. I know that there are some issues with the technology that we're trying to resolve, by the way. We might be developing our own app that you'll download onto your phone that will hopefully solve 95% of the problems that we'll see. Also, buy my book. It's called Multi-Role Clinical Supervision. If you're a supervisor or you're thinking about becoming a supervisor of other clinicians, I recommend the book. I did a lot of research for it. I consider it evidence-based because I refer to a lot of research. It's a short read. It's not a huge textbook. I think it's 110 pages or something, and it's a smallish book. So I don't know. I find it to be not as horrible of a read as a textbook could be. Also, like our Facebook page if you haven't already, and play our Tuesday Tougher Bluff game. Also, on the Facebook page, I've started to add more polls and discussions and stuff, and it can be quite interesting. Also, join the Facebook fan group. I actually don't go to the fan group because I want fans to have their own Facebook fan group where they can talk amongst themselves and say whatever they want to say. Also, you can tweet Umberto at Psych0Berto. And you can also tweet us. I've started using Twitter more and plan to in the future. I also plan on using Instagram more. We'll see about that. Twitter and Instagram just confuse me because I'm an old man. Also, if you're looking for archived episodes, go to the website. It's the best way to get older episodes. And there are pages on the website that are dedicated to just the premium episodes, the episodes that are only available to patrons. And there's 2 pages there that have them all there because sometimes people are looking for a very specific episode. And the website, I don't know, I feel like it's a pretty good way to find an archived episodes. It's in some ways, it's the only way. Also, we're trying to achieve our next goal on Patreon. So if you know other people who might be interested in becoming a patron, let them know. The next Patreon goal, we're going to offer another scholarship. We're currently offering a scholarship, but this is going to be another scholarship that's going to be $2,500. So, so along those lines, we're at the end of this month, January 2019, is the deadline for the current applications. So if you're interested in applying for the scholarship of $2,000, then please email us at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. Not that, as of this recording, not that many people have applied. So I would say your chances are pretty good at this point anyway. We'll see. I imagine I'm going to get a lot of applications at the last minute because people want enough time to write their essays. Also, if you're looking for a mug, become a $20 patron. The last thing here, the last few things here are, I started working with ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter is something you hear a lot of advertisements of on other podcasts. So particularly if you're an employer. So if you're an employer and you're looking to sign up with ZipRecruiter, if you could go to ziprecruiter.com/psychology in Seattle and you sign up through that website, through that link, we get a pretty sizable kickback from ZipRecruiter. Because I think employers, when you sign up for ZipRecruiter, it costs a fair amount of money. So if you go to ziprecruiter.com/psychology in Seattle, and again, you sign up through that link, then we get a pretty big kickback. So if you're in the market and you're about to do it, that would be a thing that you could do if you so chose. Also, if you become I think it's a $50 patron or a $35 patron, I'm not sure what they decided to do, but at one of those higher levels, you can, I think we're offering consultant services by me. I should probably know this. We just launched this, but I will provide over the phone or in person, I suppose, if you live in the area, consultation services, whether it's, for your business or for your life or something. I'm not going to provide therapy because that involves a whole other kind of situation, but I can provide education or consultation. Some people hire me as a consultant for supervision or for their business or even for understanding how personality disorders work. One person hired me, a listener of the podcast hired me to answer questions about borderline personality because their partner, this person who called me, thought that their partner might suffer from borderline. And so we just kind of problem solve that. Again, it's not therapy. I'm not trying to provide treatment. I'm just providing education over the phone. So if you become one of those upper patrons, that's a service that might be available to you. I don't think we've worked out exactly the details on that. But anyway, along those lines, if you wanted to hire me as a consultant, then you can do so. You just email us at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. Another area that I've consulted on are client rights. Some people will hire me and say, my therapist did this to me. What does that mean? Another area where I've been hired by listeners is therapists who are going through some kind of legal troubles or ethical issues. And they'll call me and consult with me about what to do or what to expect or how to strategize a way of, reducing the damage to their career. So anyway, if you're into that, that would be that. So that was the Dad Challenge podcast. Let me know what you think. If you have comments or whatever, comment below if possible, or email us at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. And if you're looking for a good podcast that mixes comedy and real life dad issues, then the Dad Challenge podcast might be for you. Well, that does it for that episode. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.